Hey there, everyone. We are talking about hands-on learning today in terms of exploring with clay. Anything that is really kind of a modeling type of material. So that includes Play-Doh, homemade salt dough, anything else moldable that lets your kids create their own topographical maps or just to explore sensorially. There are so many ways that we can explore using clay, this moldable medium. We're going to talk about that today. So welcome to Montessori 101. This is a series all about the magic of Montessori. And we believe that every child deserves to have a Montessori education. So nice to meet you. Those of you who may be new, I'm Aubrey.
I'm David. Modeling clay is actually just one of the 21 Montessori Essentials that we love. We've been doing a whole series. We've talked about the Pink Tower so far. I think we did pictures, so all kinds of fun stuff. And this time we're talking about modeling clay. Now, if you're interested in the full list, we actually have a downloadable on our website. If you go to childoftheredwoods.com/essentials, you can get the free checklist with the whole 21 and some tips and things like that. But today we are talking about clay, modeling clay, Play-Doh, salt dough, all sorts of things of that sort. And we're going to talk about it in the context of physical science, which is one of the 10 subject areas we focus on in Montessori education. Now, in fact, though, of course, you can use clay in all 10. So we're going to give a...
We're going to talk about all 10.
We will. But we do want to give a little special attention to how you might use it in physical science. And that is actually also covered in that free guide. But it's just so versatile. You can use it in basically anything. You name a subject area and you're going to be able to figure out how to use clay. In fact, we're going to give you some hints on that. So what exactly is clay?
What is clay? Well, clay, I mean, I think we all kind of know it when we feel it, right?
Sure.
Comes from the earth. You might think about walking in different landscapes and you might hear that your own soil is more loamy or more clay-like. And you probably know if it's clay, for people who grew up in Texas especially, you know, like clay is actually really tough stuff to try and dig through. If you're going to try and till your soil, what you're going to end up with is a whole bunch of clumps, right? Rather than here in San Francisco, we've got a lot of sand in our backyard. So our backyard dirt tends to be, or soil tends to be just like very, very easy to dig into and sift through, you know, just not a lot of clumps in it, unless there's decomposing material. But when we lived in Texas, I knew we had a lot of clay in our soil. And so when you went out there to dig, you really had to throw your whole weight onto the shovel and lift it up. And when it did come up, it was usually in like big chunks.
That's right.
Which made it super fun to play in the rain because it made a really great mud. I don't know if you remember doing that in your backyard as a kid. But so I just have so many great memories of being outside and enjoying the clay-based soil that was in our backyard because it was such a great texture. We get real slimy in the rain and just be clumpy, and you can mash it and mold with it. It was so fun. So yes, that is the clay that we're talking about, you know, its origins. It does come straight out of the earth. It actually originates from this mineral called feldspar, which creates it. Actually, the feldspar alone just looks like a rock, right? It's like a mineral. But if you put feldspar into the earth and you let it like erode over, I don't know how many years, thousands and thousands of years, the rain and the wind and everything eroding from it is going to help it to transform into this clay-like substance. So clay often has silica in it, which is what we make glass out of. And that kind of gives it a little bit of its firm texture, I think. So it's pretty interesting stuff. So if you have a child in lower elementary, you might even be inspired to go and research, you know, where did clay come from?
Totally.
It would be a fun experiment. But in the purposes of this talk, we're also not just going to talk about clay itself. We're going to talk about anything that is moldable. So that could include dough that you use to make bread with.
Yeah, cookies,
or
bread,
Play-Doh,
pasta. Yep. Something
Um,
that you buy in a store.
yeah.
Something you make.
It could include beeswax. They often
Mm-hmm.
have beeswax sold often through the Waldorf kind of mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Companies selling to Waldorf families often will sell this moldable beeswax
That's
that
right.
warms to the touch, and you kind of mold, kind of play with it.
Yeah.
Just very similarly to the way you do with Play-Doh, but it just has a different texture to it.
It does. And that's what part of the fun. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But clay, so when we're talking about moldable things, it could be clay, like natural clay from feldspar. It could be dough that you make, or salt dough that you're not intending to eat but is shapeable and you can bake. It could be something else that's natural, like mud or sand castles. These are all kind of variations on that. And because of that, when we talk about the history of clay or moldable things, we don't really have a start date, right? Because it existed before humans. Like the earth was here before humans were walking on it. And so there was earth and clay and mud. We do know that pottery is very, very, very ancient. It goes back about 29,000 years at least, or more. I think they found shards, from many, many, many millennia ago. Just to give you a sense of time, it's about 20,000 years before farming.
Wow.
Yeah, and about 25,000 years before writing. So humans have been making things out of pottery for a very, very long time, since the Neolithic age.
It's super useful, right?
Super
it gives
useful.
us containers to carry things in. It's something that actually can transport water.
Yeah, and you don't have to. You can, depending on the kind of material you have, it can harden with very low temperature, so you don't have to fire it. And so you can imagine, if you're an ancient person and you don't have access to a furnace because you have no idea what a furnace is, you need something that could maybe dry in the sun, or maybe you could dry by a campfire, something that would be simpler or lower heat. So you need that kind of versatility, but you also can do so much with it. You could put things in it, you could store them, you can mark on it, you can do all kinds of stuff. Even before they had writing, they were trying to make shapes and depictions out of it. Now, in terms of school, we don't really know for sure. It's actually impossible for me when I try to think about when children first started playing with clay or dough or something. Like, I think it's from the invention of children and mud, there were children making dams
for sure
to block flows of water.
In fact, I would suspect that children would be the first innovators of pottery.
That's right. I mean, even other non-human animals, we use clay and mud, and beavers make dams and things like that.
Oh, that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's and birds make nests, mud daubers, insects. Yeah. So you have all kinds of creatures that are using this natural environment, this natural material. So for sure, it's old. But, in our creative play, it's something we've been giving children, for a very, very long time. We don't really know when, but we do know that kids love it, adults love it, and probably have for as long as we've been here. So why do we use it? What is the purpose of clay? Like, it's natural, it's fun, mud daubers and all that stuff. But why would we introduce it into a classroom setting?
Yeah. So now that you mentioned that, I actually, we debated for a while what materials should go on the essential list.
21 list. Yeah.
And we picked clay, and we realized that clay could fit into several different categories, and we eventually kind of settled on physical science for it. But I was actually thinking, out of the school supplies that we usually require kids to bring to school, clay isn't usually one of them.
Yeah, you have markers, crayons, pencils, paper, colored paper,
tissues.
Yeah. Tissues, right?
Yeah, maybe even Q-tips sometimes, but usually not clay. You usually find clay in the art classroom. They'll have a day to play with clay, and the art teacher will facilitate some kind of sculpture making.
That's right.
But it's not a traditional material in a traditional classroom, or at least the kind of public.
It's so identified with children, Play-Doh and things like that. But you're right.
However, it's kind of more the type of thing that we sell to parents for entertainment for children, right?
That's right.
Like, keep your kids busy because they've got the Play-Doh, right? Everybody. Exactly. In fact, I think my 5-year-old niece just received a lot of Play-Doh for Christmas.
Yeah, it's a classic.
Yeah, it's so classic, and there's so many So many variations that companies come up with, to help children, mold it into different things. I
Well, it speaks
remember.
to a natural joy, right? Playing
It
with and
does. It
squishing
does, but
and
it's not
sculpting.
necessarily thought of as an educational material. And so by putting it on our list, I think that we are really trying to elevate it, because what we realized is it actually is used in the Montessori curriculum a lot.
Totally.
It's a lot, enough to help us narrow it down to one of our 21 essentials in Montessori. And when you think about what dough or clay really represents to the child, is it is a physical, tangible way to learn in a hands-on way. Maria Montessori believed and then professed over and over and over in almost every single lecture. There's like a variation on this theme. She kept saying the hand allows the mind to reveal itself. And what she meant was, when we touch things, when we create with our hands, there is a mind-body connection going on.
That's right.
Even before the words mind-body connection were even thought of,
That's right.
she was talking about this a long time ago.
That's right.
Before we really even had that concept. But what she saw was that when children played with things, and not necessarily, even if it doesn't even have to necessarily be with the hands, it could be with the whole body, the experiencing something sensorially with our senses, it creates this imprint in their minds. And then they can pull from that imprint or that knowledge base about what something feels like and looks like, the characteristics of it, and then they can apply it to abstract things.
Yeah,
but that transition doesn't happen until later.
Right. So it would make sense, because she, a lot of her earlier work was with the younger children, and they're in that sensorially rich period, right? Yeah. And so they're using their hands and their other senses, touch and taste and so forth, to sort of understand the world. And eventually they'll make the connection, they'll make that journey to abstraction at around the age 6, right? As they move into the second plane. But yeah, you could just imagine, like,
it's slow coming, right? It's not just like a switch.
No, of course, but it's a progression, right? As you move through the planes. But around that, sometime in that general area, children are going to have started to make connections that are abstract. So they're going to start having a more abstract understanding of the world, and not just the sensorial. But and so what her observation was in so many areas, including like something like clay, was that the child's manipulation of these things, the sensorial experience, were the training ground that would then lead them to this adult-like abstract thinking that we continue to have. So once you make that transition to abstract thinking as you enter the second plane, exit the first and enter the second, it basically sets the pattern for the rest of your life.
Yep.
Right. So that's why she was so fascinated by those first few years, because they're unique, and why she really wanted us to pay close attention to these things, and would teach us something like the hands allow the mind to reveal itself, because the child is pre-abstract thinking in a context.
Yeah. And I think in Montessori education, we tend to also really enjoy and prioritize natural materials over man-made, human-made plastic type of materials.
Yeah, we would like clay versus a 3D printer.
Kind of, right. We prefer it. We feel like it's the natural element really gives that child the extra sensory feel. And I kind of, in some ways, hesitate to say this too strongly, because we have a lot of plastic toys in our house.
Yeah. Legos would be a good example.
Legos are a great example. Yeah.
They're not a Montessori toy, but they're not harmful.
No, they're not. They're not. And there's a lot, like most of the affordable children's toys that are out there are made of plastic.
Yeah.
And it's not that children don't still get a sensory impression from anything that is made with plastic, but that being said, there's something really special about the feel of a natural material. Just the weight of it, the texture of it, the imperfection of it. The fact that when you pick up, when you go outside and pick up a ball of dirt, you're going to get a lot of different types of textures in there. It's not going to feel perfectly consistently smooth. You might get a little rough bump here or over there. And it's the same with wood. When you pick up something made out of wood, it is generally, you're going to find that wood has a unique grain to it. And I think that those little imperfections are part of the beauty of the natural materials.
So certainly, it seems that in our minds really prefer things that are not exactly identical, right? When we think about the studies that like one half of your face is not identical to the other half, and actually, how beautiful a person is perceived is, in part based on that distinction. The symmetry or the asymmetry, the beauty mark, or you think about other works of art or things, a painter, a sculptor, or an artist would make, and there's a slight variation, or even in music, when the artist slightly changes something about the song at one point, it really sparks in our mind. And they've done all kinds of studies that have shown like this really is appealing to us. And I think what you're saying makes a ton of sense, right? It must be born from the fact that the things that were most meaningful to us for the majority of our existence on this earth were imperfect things that had perfection from the earth itself. So clay is an imperfect medium. You can't make a perfectly shaped thing from it every single time. And that's part of what makes it so wonderful.
I also think part of the magic is, as you mentioned, just the knowing that you are playing with the same kind of medium that some other, like your ancestors and your ancestors' ancestors have been playing with for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. That's right. There's just something psychologically kind of amazing about that.
Yeah, we have that sense of, it's similar to the sense that you have when you like have candles or things like that, or during Christmas time we did Advent and with the candles, and you have the sense of like this is an ancient practice that goes back many, many, many thousands of years, and it's really powerful. And it helps us connect. So I think you're right.
Yeah. And so on that, we've been talking about clay a lot, but we can also talk about dough in the same way. I don't know exactly how long humans have been making dough-based
I'm not
food,
sure either, but very
but
long.
I do know that even our children, when they go to their nature school, recently they were making some kind of bread out of acorns, and then cooking that over a fire. And it didn't look like a loaf of bread.
No, they milled acorns by hand and then baked it somehow, or fry bread.
It's still made of some kind of dough.
It did, exactly.
You can make dough out of a lot of stuff, any kind of grain or nuts or kind of seeds type of thing that you grind and then mix with water, and then boom, you have a dough.
Totally.
The most common one, of course, is flour. We've got flour dough for basic bread baking. I love bread making, as you know, and we baked a lot of bread when our kids were little. So I think that it actually reduced the need for us or their desire to actually play with Play-Doh because there was so much dough available. we were just baking so much dough, and if you're going to bake your dough and then you're going to make your dough and then only bake the bread with it, then that's fine. But I always gave them time to play with it or reserved a certain amount so that they could explore freely. And then I would cook my loaf of bread, and then we would cook whatever they had made.
Yeah, that's right.
Which you would come home from work and I'd be like, we made stuff, and you always ate it no matter what it looked like. But often it was just like little snakes. we baked basically crackers.
Yes, exactly. So what is the point of all this? It's that it's to call to your attention that something like clay, Play-Doh, salt dough, whatever, these are modeling wax. These are actually really valuable and genuine teaching materials that we tend to sort of denigrate them, or I'll go buy the kids some Play-Doh and a little some kind of a device that helps them make pretend food or something like that. And that can be fun. But I think it tends to then have us think it's a healthier version than playing Nintendo or something.
Right.
But actually it's more than that. It actually it's no less of a valuable teaching tool than a piece of paper and a crayon. It's just a 3-dimensional object. And so part of the point here is it's actually superhuman. It goes way back into our ancestry. It speaks to us for a reason. It calls all these things that we've talked about to mind, and you should let your children enjoy it. And you should apply some good Montessori lessons. So let's talk about Montessori lessons or concepts that you can practice that use modeling clay.
Yeah. All right. So many lessons.
Totally.
So if you don't have any moldable material at your house right now, you're going to definitely want to go get some, because
or at least get some flour, water, and
Greg, get out your flour
salt
and some
make
water.
some
Yeah.
dough. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And homemade Play-Doh. We actually did make a lot of homemade Play-Doh too. Just because it was so fun.
And you can color dyes or paint it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with physical science, because that's the official category that we put clay into.
That's right.
So with physical science, children, I mean, I think part of it is kind of obvious, right? Like clay is earth.
Mm-hmm.
And on one sense, we can just say we are literally introducing our children to the land, right?
Yes.
And a little bit of the land mixed with water makes a good, interesting moldable material. That's right. One of the very classic lessons in the primary within the physical science.
And the physical science in this case, we tend to break it in, or we've broken it into two major areas. You have physical laws like physics, protophysics, and things like that, gravity, and so forth. And then you have physical geology or geography, and that's sort of the shape of the earth as an object as it formed. And so when we're talking about using clay, we're thinking about things like building a model of the earth where you can show the layers, or making a topographical map. So laying out something and then molding up an island, and then putting it in a tub and pouring water and showing how the island sinks down to the bottom, but the water covers it up about halfway, right? And helping them envision, like, well, that's what Hawaii or Tahiti or any other island looks like, or even a continent like the United States, like North America, that it's connected to the bottom, and helping them imagine that.
Yep. So that's a classic primary work that you mentioned, the land and water forms. And you can actually buy them. A lot of Montessori school classrooms have actually bought them. They come pre-made, made out of mostly plastic, and where your children can fill in where the water goes and notice where the land is. But it's so much more fun to do it yourself.
Yeah, because we study specific landforms, and you could just recreate those landforms. You can look at a picture, you can get out the dough, and you can make it.
Yeah. So you create an island in the middle, and then you would take that clay and mash it back down up the sides and create a little lake, and create all kinds of fun land and water forms out of those.
Make an isthmus, make a peninsula, make all kinds of shapes and things, and experimenting with where water goes or the differences. Like you can imagine making a mountain, and here's and then you're going to blow on the mountain, and you're going to show how the mountain blocks wind, and then this can help you kind of create the concept of a rain shadow, which you can see on our earth. Like that's why certain parts of the earth are, let's say in North America, are dry. We have a desert after the Rockies. It's because of the rain shadow, and the rain shadow is caused by the blocking of the winds. And you can help them demonstrate this. Like, what would happen if I blew the fan but I made the mountain lower? Well, it would just blow right across. How might that change? So you can start to do all kinds of really fun things related to weather, the topography of the earth, the layers of the earth, all sorts of fun stuff. In fact, I know in lower elementary, the layers of the earth is one of the lessons that we teach. And that's a great thing. You can imagine making the salt dough, dyeing the layers, different colors, and then making the balls and wrapping it around. And then you cut it and you show the child the layers, and it's really, really fun.
Yeah, you can actually also do it in primary or lower elementary. That's true. It's one of those that crosses both. And in Constellation, recently we did the layers of the sun.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And I know that we had families who used the clay in the same way to do the layers of the sun.
Because we had done a 4-part card of it that they then were able to translate into because we did a scientifically accurate layers, and they were able then just to recreate, like, here's the core and here's the so there's all sorts of fun stuff that you would do. And again, that would be part of physical science, but physical science is only one of the 10. Another one that you would do, I think, if you're looking at like life science, which is which looks at like biology, zoology, botany, the evolution of life on the earth. So it's related to physical science. But one of the things that I was reading that people were doing, they were making like anatomy models. So they might make a model of a cell. They might make models of bones. You might also do something like showing how fossils are formed by pressing something into the clay and then removing it and seeing the impression, and kind of thinking about, like, well, how would that have made an impression of an ancient leaf? Like if you look, and then maybe seeing a picture of an ancient leaf that's left an impression, and thinking like, well, how did that happen? Well, it basically happened like this, and then you can recreate that at home. This is another use of clay that would go right along with a different kind of science. This would be like with botany or the creation of the earth, that second grade lesson around evolution. So that would be a really nice thing to do with clay as well. It's also just really fun to make impressions, right?
It is,
Stuff, push things down into the clay and see what kind of shape comes out. Another one I was thinking of was similar to that in humankind. We already talked about pottery. Look at examples and then make some pottery. It doesn't have to be super fancy or elaborate, but you can kind of give kids a sense of how this would be hand building, unless you have a wheel, but, hand building some different shapes or sculpting little figurines. So part of what we would study in humankind is the history of humans. And so we might look at the different like little statues or gods or idols or things that were once created in the past. And for an older child, especially who might be really interested in modeling something like that out, it could be a lot of fun to kind of let them play with that. There's also just classics like you study under the fundamental needs of human. You study things like habitats, houses. Can you build little bricks and stack them up like mud huts and things like that? Or studying the different materials that people would use that are earth-based materials to create homes, right? Like bricks or mud bricks or things like that. We actually, I think also in Constellation last year had a study on different forms of homes and how they were made.
Mm-hmm.
What's some others that come to mind for you?
Well, we could talk about just talk about and if you're going to talk about lower elementary, we could talk about the reading and writing lessons. You mentioned the clay tablets.
Yep.
So we would probably be including that kind of exploration of how humans used clay to learn how to write.
Yep.
You can actually take little instrument and make the impressions in the clay in the same way that ancient people did.
That's right. This is the third grade lesson, or the fourth. I can't remember which of the invention of writing. And it deals with sort of how
the fourth grade
lesson and the development of the cuneiform. And yeah, right. So that would be a bridge between both humankind and reading and writing, which is perfect because that's exactly the kind of interdisciplinary learning we want to emphasize in Montessori. I was also thinking that so related to reading, writing, thing for grammar, we have those really wonderful symbols, and letting kids make and paint three-dimensional versions of those symbols. You can actually buy wooden versions of those or plastic.
Or two-dimensional versions.
That's true. Or, very flat, right? And cutting them out, right? And then you could cure them or bake them or whatever type of, whatever mechanism you might have. You could paint them because they have specific colors. And then you could put those out in doing your different activities, like labeling nouns or taking a sentence and deconstructing or parsing through the sentence and putting these big symbols over the words themselves. It could be a lot of really fun tactile ways to explore grammar. I was also thinking that in grammar, the miniature farm, it's not always a farm now, but a miniature environment is a classic. And you could imagine making little pieces that would go into your miniature environment that you would then be able to do the lessons with. So you make a little figure of a person who's, I don't know, standing here, and then you're also going to build a barn out of something else.
Farmer.
Yeah, a farmer, right. So you have your farmer, you have a barn, and you make those things by hand, and it's really fun. And then you could do the lesson like the farmer is in the barn, the farmer is on the barn, and these sorts of actions are part of the grammar curriculum. And you're sort of also working in this idea of like having some creative fun playing with it.
Yeah, there are a lot of beautiful materials out there to buy.
Certainly.
And having a beautiful dollhouse or barn is one of the classic things. You mentioned grammar, and the grammar farm is a classic. It's basically like a dollhouse, but but with farm animals inside for the children to play with and then to learn grammar with. But you bring up a really important point, and that is that children don't necessarily always care how pretty something is, so you might be online looking at these beautiful barns, and with farm animals and things, wooden structures that you can open up and your child will play with. But often what we have found is that our children actually play more with the things that they made that actually don't really look like the thing they're supposed to look like. So getting out your cardboard box, just drawing, like attaching a little cardboard roof to it, cutting a little hole, in there for your animals to go through. And then even just like, whatever you make out of clay, your child is likely to really be invested in engaging with it.
Yes.
If you take the time to make it, even if it doesn't look very good.
So the word isn't like, don't go, make everything out of clay. Don't go worry about buying stuff. You can do that. But if your child has gotten interested in working with clay, let's say you've put it out and they've made all kinds of little figures, use it as an opportunity, depending on their age, to give them a grammar lesson. Like, oh, this little thing is a cow, of course. Oh, where does Mr. Cow stand? He stands over here. And you can talk about all sorts of things related to grammar and all kinds of lessons that relate to using the concept of the miniature environment, but with the materials they've made. Again, it doesn't have to replace or be the only thing you use, but like you said, it can be so meaningful when kids get invested in it. It sticks in a different way. And it's also great because you're really kind of inviting them to take ownership over that environment, and you're letting them have creative input into the materials themselves. Speaking of creative input on materials, I was thinking for math, one option might be, I remember back when the kids were little, we had a whole bunch of sets of different shaped objects. We had little bears that were like glass blue and different colors, making little objects of similar types of objects, and then using those for counting as an alternative to beads can be really fun. So that's another thing you could imagine doing. And you're also, I see you've got on your desk the original money. So we talk, that's that 5th grade lesson about the origin of numbers and math. Do you want to show our?
Sure. So these I just made out of air dry clay as little examples. These are from a lesson that I gave in our elementary curriculum. But they would be like little jars of oil, and they actually made little pieces like these and traded them, just like as money. And they also made these little tokens. So, like something like this with a little X on it. I can't remember what it stood for, but like maybe they stood for like sheep. So maybe like here's 2 sheep, and I'll trade that, and you'll give me, these 2 containers of oil in exchange. And so it was a way to visualize the way what we were trading
in a small way, like in a way that they could carry in a pouch. Yeah. Right. And so this again is a great example of you're teaching humankind, a history of humankind. You're also teaching about that wonderful lesson, that 5th grade lesson about math and the development of numbers, and how it went from very concrete representations to abstract things over time. There's a great parallel to the 4th grade lesson on reading. You're having them make the materials, and it also goes with sort of that underlying, especially earlier when the kids are really kind of first getting into abstract thinking around math in primary and in lower elementary, physical representations like beads or other things to help them sort of think about quantity and division and multiplication and all the sorts of good stuff that eventually you'll do. There's no reason you can't sort of bring all those things together by making some historically representative tokens. Anything else when you think about, let's see, we've talked about geometry. I was thinking about 3D shapes. You can definitely help have 3D shapes. Art is an easy one, painting, sculpting, things like that. What do you think about for sensorial?
I think, well, you mentioned shapes, and that would also be sensorial, technically. But it's just sensorial would just be the sensory impression of the clay.
Yeah, you might imagine hiding objects inside the clay and then letting the child sort of feel around for it and remove the object.
I have done that before.
Yeah, so those are fun, like a gross motor and a fine motor skill, and just the sort of the tactile experience. What about for practical life? That was the one I had been sort of puzzling through. Like, how would you use clay in a practical life environment?
How would you use it in a practical life way?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that clay traditionally is used to make like mugs and containers and things.
Oh, yeah.
So
great
you could
idea.
have, we have actually used a lot of clay in our constellation units.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that we do is have lessons on having the children actually make their own little pots, things to put things in and carry them. So that would be a very practical, very practical way. And then you could use those containers to maybe tong things in and out of, or to pour water out of, or if it's water safe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was also thinking cleanup. If your child participates, let's say you make some salt dough, and you've created it, the process of preparation and cleanup and so forth is also a big part of practical life, and so involving them through that whole process. But I love that idea of like making, because kids do that, right? They'll make like a little cup out of something, and here's my cup out of Play-Doh or whatever, and you're right. So basically, endless opportunities.
I think it's a medium you can pull out whenever you're exploring whatever subject you're exploring. I think that you can always just think, oh, I've got the clay in our cabinet. How could I incorporate that into what we're doing right here?
That's right.
So do you want to talk about like some lessons?
Yeah.
I mean, we've mentioned a lot of activities that you could do. Okay, so I think when we talk about clay or dough, we need to think developmentally first, about what children are capable of doing with it. So I was thinking, with your toddler, really what you're wanting to lean into is just the sensory impression of the clay itself. You don't want to try and do anything too incredibly fancy with your clay. You could be modeling, doing all kinds of fun things with it. In fact, you mentioned humankind, I think, but I don't know if you mentioned the unit we have coming up, which is Adorn, which did you mention that already?
Nope.
Which we're going to be making actually like beads out of clay.
Constellation.
Right? In Constellation.
The February theme is Adorn.
Yeah. We're going to be making our own little beads to string.
And fruit bracelets.
Right, which aren't made out of clay.
No. But they are strong.
They are strong. So, I mean, it's great to be modeling these things for your children, but I think also good to have some realistic expectations of what the kids are going to do. Right. So usually with toddlers, the way we would set it up in Montessori is we would have a tray, and we would just put like a little container of a small amount of clay on. And actually those little containers that Play-Doh actually comes in, that's actually a great size container. At home, we tended to use like one of those small 1 cup Pyrex jars, or little Rubbermaid containers. And so you just set that onto the tray. Hopefully it's something your child can take on and off easily, get the lid on and off easily. And then on the tray, you might just put 1 or 2 interesting things to explore it with. So the first introduction would be just the tray, the large tray, and the Play-Doh. And that would be it for as long as your child is enjoying it. Like I guess the point I'd like to make is that there's no need to go crazy with all of the squishy,
all the
noodly
machines and the stuff that they sell.
Right, for Play-Doh. It's just like the dough itself is enough. So if you're baking bread and you're making a bunch of dough, or if you make your own Play-Doh, whatever, try not to give your toddler's first experience with clay with all of the stuff. Like, you don't need all the cookie cutters. And often I know at stores you can buy just these giant bags of like cookie cutters, designed even for Play-Doh. But I would say hold off on that. Just give the dough. And then allow your toddler, and watch your toddler, because they do put things in their mouth. So if it's something like salt dough, you don't want them to necessarily be eating a ton of salt, or
just generally probably not wanting them to eat the clay.
Right.
Whatever the material.
Right. And choose something non-toxic, but also be mindful to supervise them, because they're probably going to want to stick it in their mouth. That's right. If it's bread dough, it's fine. Unless your child is gluten intolerant or something, like it's fine. Let your child explore the taste of the dough and just have fun with it. But if it's something that's not really supposed to be eaten,
like an artist clay is something like that.
Well, I was thinking even just regular Play-Doh, you want your child eating it. So you're going to supervise, but otherwise just expect them to just like be mashing it with their little fingers. They actually might not be all that interested in it at first because they might not really understand what it is about it that's special. So just kind of allow that time to let your toddler explore. And when you give a toddler a lesson, really all you need to do is just keep it super simple. You're going to put the tray down, show them how to undo the container, take out the Play-Doh. This is all part of the lesson. You're going to do this silently. And then you just tell them this is Play-Doh, or this is dough, or this is clay. And then you might say, watch, mash, and then you like mash it. And then you put it back down and then you poke it, right? So you're going to just demonstrate a few of the ways that you might interact with it. And then very quickly, because this is a super fast lesson, because we're with toddlers, you're going to take that clay and ball it all back up and, put it back in the container and fit that lid back on, and maybe even take your tray and back and put it on the shelf. All right. So that your child has the chance to see the whole procedure. And it may be at first, it may feel silly to give a lesson on something so simple as like, this is clay and that's it. But that is the Montessori way. We want to introduce everything to our children with full modeling.
Yes, it's intentionality, right?
Yeah. So they can see the whole procedure. And then you're going to kind of just let go, let it exist, see what they do with it. You can encourage them to, if they're not getting it out on their own and playing with it, you can encourage that by, every day, maybe you get it out and you play with it, and just all you're going to do is you're just going to explore it in that very simple way. You're not going to try and do anything super fancy with it. You're just going to kind of mash it around and play with it and roll it and, poke it and stuff, then put it back in the container. And after your child has some experience with that, then you can start to add some little instruments along. And some of the instruments that I really like to add to Play-Doh at first, before we introduce the big array of fancy stuff, is a little jam spreader. So that's like just a little spreading knife that's super short, very blunt edge.
Very blunt,
And you're just going to add that to the tray. And like one day that will be on the tray too. And at this point, you can show your child maybe how to roll it into a ball and then cut it with a little knife, or maybe make a snake,
Especially as they start to get older and they get more dexterous in there. With their hands, they could start to do more of the sort of rolling and cutting and things like that.
So if you can trust your child, while you're supervising them, toothpicks is also a really fun thing to add to Play-Doh or modeling clay, because they can, experience what it's like to stick the little stick in, especially if you can find some of various sizes. So maybe it's even like a stick from an actual stick from outside, or some nature materials.
We're having them go and find things. Yeah, it's always amazing I've always found it, the kids find it amazing when they press a coin into clay and they see the impression. It's so very small and subtle, but it's so clear when it comes through. And so those sorts of experiences are really, really cool.
And this is actually something that you can do with your existing Montessori materials. And it actually is something that you can continue to experience with your child as they grow. It appeals even to elementary children, right?
Of course.
But can you imagine, like, if you got out the tiny, like the smallest 5 cubes of the pink tower, and one day you just set that on the tray with the Play-Doh, and obviously you're not going to let the Play-Doh dry or the clay dry on the Montessori material, because that would be men's cleanup, not so nice to the material, but just as an experience to press a material.
Imagine pressing the smallest cube in and then pressing the largest cube or a larger cube next to it,
or even the smallest cube inside. You could experiment with
or turning the shape. You do the largest and then turn a little bit to do the next one, and seeing
similar
the
to the metal insets.
So all sorts of fun stuff you can do, and they're sort of seeing in real life this abstract concept about size and the difference of size and how they fit together.
If you have a lot of clay, it would be fun to combine that with the metal insets too. They would make some really interesting impressions, just those geometric shapes, or the geometry cabinet, all of those shapes that are in there.
So it's a common thing. It's all around us: mud, clay, all that stuff. But as with all Montessori things, it's about the intention. And that's why we can take this common thing and really make it something super valuable. And you start out with the toddler by saying, giving that specific lesson beginning to end, kind of controlling it. And then as they become more engaged with it and they become more dexterous, introducing a limited number of additional tools and avoiding the pre-made big kits.
At first.
Yeah, because
and we do the same thing with paint. We would get out only one color at a time and let them really explore that first.
When you introduce the color tablets, you do 3 colors.
Yeah. I think it's that we just don't want to rush children into the next thing. We want to give them the medium in its purest form first and let them really just have that, just revel in that experience. Now, as adults, we've probably had that experience many times ourselves, and we want to just jump right into the fun stuff. Let's see what we can make. I can make a cat out of this.
Exactly.
Right. I can do this. Or we give a child Legos for the first time and we want to give them the whole big set of Legos and then make these complicated structures that they're not capable of building yet. But in Montessori, we really want to scaffold their learning. So we start with here's a little teeny tiny
here's a tray,
experience,
a small amount of clay.
And then we're going to build and build and build. And there's all kinds of things that you can build on with it. David and I have just given you some creative ideas there. One of my favorites is actually making a snake out of the Play-Doh and then cutting it with scissors. Oh, yeah. With a pair of child's size scissors before, or even during the time that they would be exploring cutting it with, with paper.
Yeah, that's right. Because the cutting, that's actually a great, isn't that that's in practical life, right? Cutting. Yeah, so that actually, kind of a fun practical life application. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so all that stuff that we just went through a minute ago about here's how you might use it in grammar or so forth, as the child gets more and more comfortable and as you're modeling with the modeling clay, then you could start to open up to these things like, let's actually make a representative thing like a mountain. And let's talk about how that actually looks like something on the earth. And it's just sort of building from a very controlled experience to something more and more creative and elaborate.
Yeah. A great way to help children to become familiar with their letters and their sounds, we use the movable alphabet for that. But you actually could make your own movable alphabet with clay.
Oh, yeah.
If you were so inclined. And in fact, I think that this is an idea that I got from Orton Gillingham, which is a very Montessori-esque way of teaching reading to children. I think they use a lot of building with clay, and a lot of hands-on movable alphabet type of.
So you would cut the shapes out of the clay?
No. You actually would roll it into a long snake, and then you would make the letter A with it, and you could do either print or cursive.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. I like that. Well, there's so much fun stuff. In terms of materials, we've talked a lot about it already, but you really can't go wrong. Play-Doh is a commercial product. It was invented in the 30s as a cleaning product. Actually, it was invented originally to clean coal soot off the walls, and then after World War II, they didn't need that so much, and so they thought, what are we going to do? So they pivoted, as we used to say here in Silicon Valley.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny because bread dough is essentially the same thing. I mean, Play-Doh is just made out of flour. Basically,
exactly.
Like flour
so
in water,
in the mid 50s, it's one of those classic baby boomer post-war toys is Play-Doh, and it's great. I mean, it's fun, it's cheap. To be honest with you, I always hated Play-Doh because I couldn't stand the colors mixing together. It just drove me bananas.
That's actually a Montessori work we didn't mention is color mixing. So you could take red Play-Doh, yellow Play-Doh, and blue Play-Doh. And we intentionally have the kids mix them, mix
See,
two
now,
of them
if I should have been given that lesson.
Blue and yellow make green, right?
See, there you go. Then that's a great example of where, because I wonder how many other kids are like that.
Another Montessori lesson that involves clay.
But that's a good one. And it actually speaks to why you would want to limit the number of colors. Because if you buy a pack, you buy those 10 packs of little, of a rainbow of colors, it's just so hard. But if you really just had the primary colors,
just red,
you could start. The child can then make that connection, and maybe instead of them thinking oh, gross, I made a yucky color, and it could be oh, cool, I made green or something, or purple or whatever. And at the end of the day, you don't have to buy any of that stuff. Flour, salt, water. It's incredibly cheap,
and
you can dye it with
cream of tartar.
Cream of tartar, right?
Yeah, cream of tartar makes it like that elastic kind of soft,
gives it that
smooth
elasticity.
Yeah,
and it's bakeable. You could paint it. You could put food coloring in it. You could do all sorts of stuff. We use that a ton. We didn't have a lot of bought Play-Doh in the house, but we had a lot of
homemade dough. Yeah,
making
both for play and
Christmas
for
ornaments.
baking.
I mean, there's so many things that you did with it. We did when the kids were little over the years, and
yeah.
it's just so much fun. And of course, going out into nature itself, mud pie, sandy beaches, they're all basically variations on the theme. And again, you're kind of starting with something simple and then moving out from there. So it was a few, you get to the point where we went to the beach, I remember, and the tide had been coming out and the water was pouring out, and you see children, including our own, going out and they're building little dams and things, and they're having like a literal experience with something that happens on a geological scale.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps them make that connection. And with the little bit of guidance, you can sort of point out like what you're creating is something that we actually see around us. So the natural world is very, very powerful. You don't have to buy Play-Doh if you don't want to. You can make it. You can go out and find something in the world, and it's super valuable. It's super high value. It's one of the 21 for a reason, and it's like I said, in that perfect Montessori tradition. What you're really doing is you're applying a teaching discipline to a natural experience, and that play is the work of the child concept. Like the child already has that inclination to go out and do it. You're just bringing a mindset to it, the intention to it, and that's what takes it to that next level. So go have fun with clay.
Thank you for hanging out with us, friends. We'll see you next week.
We'll see you next Tuesday at 1. We're doing another special on essentials. This one is golden beads. So we hope that you will join us for that.
Okay, take care.